This is a Bulldog Radio podcast.
The Ferris State Bulldogs have upset the nation's number 2 ranked team. Wide open! Taylor is going to take this one to the house! Touchdown Bulldogs!
Hi everybody, welcome into the Most Valuable Sports Podcast. Brandon Worth joining here live in the To Be Named Soon studio on this lovely Friday the 13th. Glad you were able to join us on this lovely Friday morning. A little cold outside, not going to lie, but being indoors, I won't lie, is very, very nice. But we got a great show in store for you, wrapping up Thursday night slate of hoops, being able to sweep the pride on both men and women's side. We'll talk about that game, break it down, and more ahead of this upcoming weekend matchups against Parkside, as well as preview the whole Ferris State weekend slate. We'll get into a little March Madness as we approach the end of January coming soon, where we get into the final stretches of conference schedules. And there's a lot of surprises that we'll bring up on some teams that are really showing out and some that aren't showing out so much, as well as the NFL playoffs begin this weekend. I'll make the picks and what you can expect from a lot of these games over the weekend. And then if we have time, we'll get into a midseason breakdown of the NBA slate and why the Pistons are in a tough spot. But first of all, before we get going, I'd like to thank all that make this show possible. That includes Anchor, the best podcast distributing platform out there. It's free for you to use. You can make your podcast today. Visit anchor.fm to learn more, as well as Bulldog Radio. If you want to be on a podcast or have your voice heard in any format, Bulldog Radio is the place for you, especially if you're a Ferris State student. You can visit Bulldog Connect today, find out the details about the group, sign up, and you can get your podcast rolling soon, anytime, quick, fast, in a hurry, just like me and Joe did 3 years ago. And look where we are today. But can't thank enough all of those that make this show possible, including the man that normally sits across from me, Joe, out for this show today. He's labeled on the injury report as day-to-day. We wish him the best of luck because he wasn't feeling well today. Joe, if you're out there listening, we all know that the show is much better with you, and we certainly can't wait to have you back in the studio as soon as possible, brother. Hope you are feeling better. Anyway, going into the Ferris State sports slate we go. Thursday night hoops has concluded, and what a battle it was, especially on the women's side in the early 5:30 game. The Bulldogs were able to squeak out a win over the Pride of Purdue Northwest. The final was 84-77, and what was a really tight contested game. And it really starts with a shout out to really our team for obviously getting the win and the determination, but also for Purdue Northwest, the way they played. That was a different team than what shows on the record is 5-12. That team played phenomenally well. And I think that really was a testament to how good the GLIAC is, because that's a 5-12 team. I don't think you find a lot of 5-12 teams that good in any other conference in the country. And I think that just is a testament to how good the GLIAC is. But the Bulldogs able to get the win, their 11th on the season, and it really took a lot in the fourth quarter with as far as just determination to grit it out. I think that overall, when you look at the stat sheet, we shot better overall, all phases from the floor, field goals, three-pointers, and free throws. And I think really the last one, free throws, was the one that stepped out the most. 22 of 27 were from the line. That was huge. Chloe Idoni, I believe, was 8 of 10 by herself, and she especially had a lot of looks in the fourth quarter to really kind of seal that stretch when we had a lead late in the fourth. And I think really Purdue Northwest actually out-rebounded us throughout this game, which was a stat that I was not aware of until I looked at it this morning when looking over some preview stuff for the show. And it didn't really feel like it. It felt like it was so back and forth. It was only 36-32 as far as the margin of the rebound totals. But, I mean, it was just a really, really gritty game all the way around. And I think really what set it apart, when you look especially at the stat sheet, I think definitely there's no question that just being able to shoot the basketball well and really have that run in the fourth quarter was really the difference in this game. It went back and forth throughout the majority of it. Purdue Northwest actually had the lead at halftime. I believe it was 40-33 at that break before the teams went into the locker room. And Purdue, I think, had a lead of, I believe it was somewhere around 13, about halfway through that third quarter. Maybe it was 11 or 13. And that was really, it looked like a down moment for this team. We lost a lot of the energy, and it just kind of felt like it was kind of dulling out. And it was really a little scary situation because this is not a game that you want to go in and kind of lose to, especially with a really good Parkside team coming up on Saturday, which we'll preview that here in just a little bit. But the team, I think, really, especially halfway through the third quarter and the fourth quarter, really flipped the switch. The energy went through the roof. There's the passion and really the determination was what set this apart. And when listening to the post-game press conference with Coach Westendorf, you could really hear that, especially, and we'll play a clip for you here in just a minute on really how that grit, I think, was really the difference maker down the stretch, and that's what ultimately got him to the win. But here's a clip from Coach Westendorf on how the team played going down the stretch and how they were able to get the victory.
That was a gritty performance. We talked about before the game, it doesn't have to be pretty as long as you're gritty. And that's a really corny saying for a coach to say, but that's really exactly what the game turned into. We played really tough down the stretch. Our defense improved as the game went on. I wouldn't say that we were stellar the entire game, but we played with a lot more energy in that second half. And that's what I really felt like was lacking in the first half, was we played a little flat-footed, but we really did a nice job of responding, bringing it. I mean, Deshauna Day had a great game out there. I want to really single her out because she had that tough defensive assignment on Dash Shaw. Did a pretty good job of not fouling her. All right, they only shot 2 free throws there in the second half, which that was huge to our defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, definitely bringing up Deshauna Day is something that really stood out to me. She had a phenomenal game. She had 17 points for the Bulldogs. While she wasn't the leading scorer, just overall her defense was really a big thing down the stretch individually. Dash Shaw is one of the best players in the GLIAC, as Coach Westendorf mentioned, and holding her only to 19 points certainly was a really big part of what kind of led this team to a victory down the stretch, because they wanted the ball in her hands, and our defense did a great job of keeping it out of her hands. She was held to 6 of 16 shooting on the night for only 19 points. But for what Dash Shaw is averaging in some of these games, that is definitely a good mark overall for her. But Deshauna had 17 as well as 4 rebounds, 3 steals, 3 crucial steals. It felt like in the portion of the game. Goalie Idoni was the leading scorer. She had 23 points in the contest, especially really the huge second half. I believe she scored 19 or 21 of them actually in the second half due to foul trouble early on in the first half. And she really was dominant down the stretch down low. She made it a mission one-on-one and really had just a phenomenal second half. So, I mean, really shout out to her, as well as Mallory McCartney, 18 points as well as 10 assists. She was really having a really dominant game out there. She was really, especially in the first half, a big contributor just based on the look she was getting. They were kind of making a little bit of different adjustments against the screen defensively, and she made all the right reads, was knocking down shots when they're going under screens and they're going over, driving to the hole and finishing with toughness. So she really had a great game. Kenzie Bowers also finished with 7 assists, 7 rebounds, and 9 points. She was a key contributor, as well as Mia Riley had 9 off the bench. She was a perfect 5 for 5 from the line. And really, you just saw all of these players really have dominant nights overall, especially the bench contributors. They might not have had as many statistical representation when you look back at this game, but they were just as crucial, especially with the defense. You don't see that much in statistics-wise how great some of these teams play defensively, but they certainly did. 5 steals and 5 blocks for this team, as opposed to the Pride only had 3 and 2 respectively. That can show you the difference that they made defensively, and a lot of those came in that second half. When they were down, they were able to put the pedal back on and really just come through at the very end, be very gritty, do whatever it takes, and they got the W. As they always say, the sloppy W always beats the clean loss any day, and that's certainly represented for this team, especially for how well they played down the stretch. And really, you want to see that going forward the rest of the season, especially coming up this weekend against a really good Wisconsin Parkside team that are ready to make some noise in the standings. But as we look over here to the women's basketball scoreboard, I would love to have Joe read these off for you, but obviously this will be in memoriam of him. No, I'm just kidding. He'll be back sooner than later, and we can't wait to have him back as well. From Thursday's games, a final from Davenport, the Panthers fall to the Cardinals 62-46 over there in Caledonia, as well as we got the win 84-77 against Purdue Northwest. Parkside came off a big win at the Sioux over Lake Superior State, 86-70 the final in that game, as well as Grand Valley holds it down in Allendale. They win 81-44 over Wayne State in that battle. So right now, after that one loss for Grand Valley, they've gotten back on track right now in the standings and remain at the top at the moment with a perfect 6-0 conference record, only ahead of Michigan Tech and Northern Michigan at 5-1. Parkside right there at 5-2, along with us at 4-2, despite us having an overall better record at 11-4 as opposed to the Rangers 9-7, followed by Saginaw Valley, Wayne State, Lake Superior, at Purdue Northwest and Davenport, all sitting at 500 or worse so far in conference play. But as we mentioned, that was the second worst team in the conference, what the numbers say. And that team gave us a lot of fits. That just shows you how good the GLIAC is across the board for how well these teams played. On over to the nightcap game we go. Ferris State men's basketball picking up the victory over Purdue Northwest 75-55. Really a game that probably there was quite a few fans that came out, which was kind of nice. We need to obviously get more so we can pack Winky every single night. But we're certainly one of the biggest things I think that came to my mind watching this game. I know kind of Joe would definitely say the same thing, was really when it comes down to how well this team shoots the basketball, it really makes it tough for anybody to beat us until we don't shoot very well. And then it becomes a little bit of a vulnerability. But what that team showed last night was they can do it in multiple dimensions. And it really shows, I think, not necessarily myself and all the others that know around this team that know that this team can be just as good without some of the three-point shooting, which obviously that's a huge benefit and definitely shows why they're one of the best shooting teams in the country when they are just clicking on all cylinders. But they can still win even if they don't shoot their best that night. And that's what really good teams do, is they know how to adapt to the game. They know exactly what to do to win that game, and they go out and execute with the best efficiency and play as possible. But Purdue Northwest hit a lot of big shots, especially going throughout that first half. They kept it pretty close. It was only 34-27 going into halftime, but we were able to extend that lead going out into the second frame, especially with a dominant 41 points in that second half. It definitely felt like the lid came off the basket for a little bit there, but when you just look at the numbers, 26% three-point shooting for what was the number one shooting team in the nation for three-point percentage. I'm sure that it's probably close to, if not especially top three, for how well this team is still shooting on their off nights, that it didn't feel like necessarily the game was as dominant. But when you look at how that team played, especially on the boards, was absolutely dominant, and certainly how that game went and just kind of regressed. It certainly was the offense, especially starting at the game, definitely was a lot better. And then it kind of got subtly worse throughout the second half, or not the second half, I should say the second portion of the first half towards the end near halftime. It got a little slower. But how that team really battled on the boards as well as getting loose balls, just being scrappy enough. And it kind of goes with how the women's game went as well for them in the second half. But when they asked Coach Brockema in the post game, they definitely pointed that out, especially for how that portion of the game was crucial to their victory. Take a listen.
Yeah, that's something that we want to try to do, is attack the glass and have that mentality. And tonight we did it. So proud of these guys. Kel getting to double digits, and Reese and Solo almost there themselves. So, that's a big thing. And when you don't shoot very well in the second half, we're a little better, but you get those second chance opportunities, or you draw some fouls, get to the free throw line, you can manage it.
Yeah, 51-26, the rebound margin was. That's almost double what the Pride had in that basketball game. And as you mentioned in the interview, Coach Bronkema, 6 points for Michael Bingham, but 10 rebounds. That was absolutely crucial for him. Solomon Aregbu was the leading scorer with 23 points, as well as 9 boards for the Dogs. And Reese Hazleton was also great off the bench with 8 boards with 5 points. And definitely you saw a lot of great play as well from Ben Davidson. He was 5 of 10 from the field for 14 points. Veas Grazoulis had a great night, an underrated night, especially when you consider how that game flow went. 13 points as well as 5 boards on 5 of 8 shooting. He was very efficient, as well as perfect from the stripe. Dolapo Olinka, good to see him back in action. He got 16 minutes in his first game back since his injury. He registered 5 boards as well as 3 points. Amari Lee had 7 assists in the game with 6 points. Shout out to him and Jimmy for coming on the show. If you haven't checked that out in the feed below, it was a great interview we had with those guys and how their role is to take roles on this team, as well as be those captains and leaders to distribute the basketball. Certainly a great conversation with him that you can check out. And certainly if you want to hear more of the post-game interviews, go to the Ferris Athletics YouTube page, where you can find all of that content related to the Bulldogs, sports, and more throughout the seasons of the whole school year. But definitely a great win overall for the Dogs, going now to take on a Parkside team at home, sitting at 12-5, 3-3 in the GLIAC. I know it's a little bit of a sore eye look when you look how this team has played in the past and for how a lot of these players are still a little upset about a couple games they lost, but they've certainly really turned it around with some great play, especially last night. And just being able to grit out that win is going to be huge. And a good Parkside team coming to town here on Saturday are going to need all the help we can get. Those games, the women's, I believe, will start at 1 o'clock for that game, as well as the men's will conclude the weekend at 3 o'clock against the Rangers. Going to be a really good matchup here, especially for how well Parkside has been playing this year in the conference, which, speaking of that, we'll get to the GLIAC scoreboard here from Thursday. They ended up getting the win over the Lakers. That is the Rangers of Parkside, 78-64 up in the Sioux, as well as the Cardinals, who have played pretty well this year, 77-65 over Davenport. And then Wayne State picking up a win over Grand Valley State, 72-63 in Allendale, the final score in that one, which that makes a little bit of a interesting dynamic now in the standings. Parkside still on top at 6-1, 12-4 overall. And they're the top team in the GLIAC as of now. Northern Michigan right behind, 5-1 in conference play, 13-3 overall. Then you have Saginaw and Lake State sitting at 4-2, despite their not so great overall records, 9-7 and 5-9 even for Lake Superior, is followed by us and Wayne State with 3-3 conference records, Grand Valley, Purdue Northwest, and then Davenport and Michigan Tech, the respectives at the bottom. But for both of these teams, men's and women's, speaking, for those wins definitely not only propels you into the standings, but certainly brings you that confidence going in against a really tough opponent this weekend, and picking up those wins on the road, at home, will be a huge catalyst before they both go on road trips here coming up soon, like we mentioned on the last episode. But great wins overall. They'll be taking on Parkside this weekend. You can still get your tickets. Visit ferrisstatebulldogs.com for more. Anyway, moving now over into hockey that is going to be taking place this weekend, starting tonight on Friday. If you're a First Day listener, we appreciate you. As well as on Saturday against Lake Superior State. The Lakers going to be going and hosting the Dogs up in the Sioux. Should be a really good game, I think, for the Bulldogs. I think this is a really perfect, not perfect case scenario. Obviously, you'd love to be starting off at home on the home ice where you've been training over the last couple weeks of break. But definitely facing off against Lake State, as we mentioned, is a perfect opportunity to gear up for these tough games coming up at home against Tech and Minnesota State coming up this weekend. So it's definitely going to be a little bit of a tough battle. Lake State, obviously, when you look at the numbers, not the best team in the CCHA, one of the worst, but they're certainly going to bring as much energy as they can because they know in years past that they've been able to beat us when they're not supposed to, and they're going to be ready to face us on home ice. But I think definitely when you've seen the past play of the Bulldog team, especially in the GLI, you see so much potential. Just got to see the consistency, right? We're able to split with any team in the country and even sweep any team in the country as we did in Minnesota State, but just being able to come back and just get those sweeps that you need to, right? The St. Thomas game earlier this year at home and even on the road, and when you had a prime opportunity against a Bowling Green team that you could have beaten twice. Those are the ones that you want, if you can beat those top teams, that you can sweep some of these lower teams. And those are certainly going to be games that you're going to want to get down the stretch. And it starts with Lake Superior State, right? And as much as it's crazy to me that this stat line just keeps sticking out to me, it's quality over quantity, especially offensively. And you saw that against Michigan State. They had 8 less shots against Michigan State, where they won 4-2, as opposed to Western Michigan, which was an 8-2 loss. So, I mean, that just shows you how well you can get good looks, and it doesn't matter necessarily the quantity that you throw on net. And I think that just kind of really shows this team, because there's some times where you feel like they rush it just a little bit, but when they're controlled, when they're methodical, when they're in their offensive zone enough, that's just as important. This defense is playing really, really well this year. The problem is there's been a lot of these top tier offenses like Western Michigan on December 28th, especially Minnesota State when we were at Mankato earlier this year, and Northern Michigan at home, where the defense was playing very well, but just spent too much time. And that's just really taxing when you're in your own end and you're on the penalty kill for 3-4 times a game. And that's just a tough thing to go into with your backs against the wall a little bit. But overall, the power play has been much better overall throughout a lot of these home games. Can we take that on the road? That's going to be the crucial portion that we need to start to see a little bit more improvement on in the second half. We kind of finished a little bit on the down streak when it comes to the power play as of the last games before the break, but the penalty kill has been a little bit better, and I think that certainly can translate over into Lake State, who's not necessarily as powerful of an offensive team as you see with some of the other teams I mentioned, but overall, I mean, Mitch Dielstra's been playing really well. Noah Giesbrecht, we'll see if he plays the Friday or the Saturday game this weekend, has been really good in net. Logan just in a little bit of slump, but he'll obviously get back on track, and then we'll have the dynamic duo back in full swing. But a lot of these other guys certainly will have prime opportunities to really put together some good performances this weekend. Just need 6, guys. Just need 6. That's going to be crucial, especially considering some of the tough games on slate. You can get 6 here. Huge confidence booster, especially getting wins on the road, and then you're going to be coming home in front of faithful. And these games are just as important to the fans too. They're watching these games, not necessarily they're tuning in on Full Hockey TV, which you certainly can at Full Hockey TV to watch all these games, but they're looking at the scores. They're seeing the record. Okay. They're just above 500. They're starting to be a little bit better. And the higher those win totals go up, the more fans that will show up. I know me and Joe talked about this before the break. We need more fans for this team because they have been playing very well. And it just might not show with the 9-9 record, but you have seen how well this team can play in front of your eyes. And I know there's a lot of people out there that are still looking from games from last year. Oh, they'll blow it away. It's like, no, this is a different team. And we could continue talking about this for so long. But the prime play of a lot of these guys, I mean, Brad Merrick, especially the hometown kid's been playing really well this year. Mitch Dielstra has been on a tear the last 4 or 5 games. As well as a lot of other great players. Andy Noel, as a freshman, has been playing really substantial minutes on the ice at the defensive spot. And really, when you look at all these games that they've had recently, they've shown that they can play with a lot of these top teams. We saw it at the GLI, beating a number 11 Michigan State team. And really, with Western Michigan, you look at the final score, and obviously it looks a little daunting, but Western Michigan A was just absolutely in fuego from that series. But we were only down 2-1 at the break. We were hanging with them. Got a little out of hand in the second, especially with some penalties. But overall, we still were playing with that team. And that's another top team that will be in the top 10 very soon. So those are the games that we need to use as those process that we talked about. Put that together, put some good hockey on the ice for 60 minutes, be consistent. That was the message that Brad Merrick in his latest media session was talking about. Every line has to produce. Take a listen.
Like 4 lines producing all the time, whether it be getting in, being heavy. A lot of emphasis lately on 2 guys getting in hard, supporting your teammates and producing offense. But we got to be good in our D zone as well. That's where the offense starts.
Being able to have both dimensions is what makes this team great. Defense turns into offense. And just as we mentioned, getting that ability to get yourself out of the defensive zone and the offensive zone to get our elite talented scorers the puck and grain opportunities. Not necessarily saying you got to throw them all on net, but get those quality looks, spend time in our zone to get the right look. And when we do so, we're one of the effective scorers in the entire country statistically. And we're going to be rooting for you boys. We can't wait to see. Hopefully you guys get 6 up in the Sioux. Friday's game, 7:07 puck drop, as well as Saturday followed up at 6:07. You can follow along at Full Hockey TV for the live broadcast with Harrison Watt, as well as Sunny 97.3, as well as on the live stats on FerrisStateBulldogs.com. Finally, finishing out the Ferris State Sports Preview, track and field will be in action this weekend indoors at Grand Valley for the Bob Eubanks Open. Super exciting. The first of the new year and the first of the season for a lot, especially of the distance crew that were competing cross country late this season for the festival championship year. But certainly going to be a great meet on deck. Got to look at a lot of the schedule as far as entries, and there's going to be a lot of good quality opponents at this race this weekend. I know, especially in the distance events, there's going to be a lot of opportunity to show up and show out. And it's super exciting for all of us. We're riding some pretty good confidence coming from a really good cross-country season, as well as a lot of promise shown from a lot of the track and field crew from the Holiday Open before the end of 2022. And hopefully that confidence will go through. And some other people also not able to compete as of yet that were not racing necessarily or competing from the Holiday Open that we have their first outside of cross country. So it's an exciting meet for everybody to get their first crack at indoor this year, and especially against some quality opponents, as I mentioned earlier. And especially just getting used to indoors definitely takes a lot more time than I think a lot of people believe it is. It's a lot different of a kind of race. It's a lot different as far as physique, as far as oxygen and airflow is concerned. You're indoors as opposed to outdoors. It takes a little bit of an adjustment, especially with being in a different distance. A lot of these shorter races and faster races as opposed to the longer endurance races across country. And especially for track and field, just going from that practice mentality and that practice venue and applying it to a meet venue with a crowd, with a lot of people watching, and that sort of thing always takes a long time as well. But a lot of great opponents going to be there this weekend, and a lot of great meets. It's always ran pretty smoothly at Grand Valley, and we look forward to hopefully that will be the same. Running events beginning at 2:15 this weekend with the 60-meter hurdle prelims. That'll be followed up by the 60-meter prelims, the mile, the 400, the 60-meter hurdles, the 60-meter dash, as well as the 600, 800, 200, 3K, and the 4x4 to end it at 5:30, which also, by the way, you may now watch the meet online thanks to the partnership with Flow Sports. All Bulldog fans can watch this meet with a Flow Sports account. You can find it on your Roku TV as well as on the Flow Sports app or on the website as well, flowsports.com. So definitely tune in. I would definitely recommend tuning in. There's going to be a lot of great performances this weekend, looking as far as the heat sheets and a lot of these already scheduled races. There's going to be a lot of top-tier dogs and some top-tier races, and it's going to be a really good start to the season, especially against some quality opponents. Of course, with the Lakers, as well as Davenport, I believe, will be there, as well as Cornerstone Aquinas, a lot of those good Grand Rapids programs, as well as a couple others, even a D1 school, I believe, from the Big Ten might be making an appearance there. So that certainly is going to bring a lot of emphasis to this meet as well, with the throwing events and field events all beginning at 2 o'clock. That's starting with high jump as well as weight throw and shot put, as well as long jump and pole vault to follow later on throughout the meet. So certainly looking forward to a lot of the great results that are about to take place for this team. I can tell you once, I know we talked about on the last episode before the end of the year for the final recap of 2022 and our first episode of 2023. This team has a lot of potential, and I know I'm biased. Sure, I understand that, but I think everybody can understand that around when you look at years past and when you look at a lot of especially with the cross-country perspective, these teams, both men's and women's, are getting a lot better. And it's certainly starting to come in fruition for how great these teams have gotten and how much work they've put in, especially in the off season and during the season as well, where you get that best quality work with your teammates, especially in the grind. And both teams have been putting in a lot of the work, man. And track and field has done the same thing as far as all the field events and sprinters and jumpers and throwers. They've been putting in the work too, and it's definitely starting to come. You can start to see the building process, which really puts a smile on my face for getting this program back on track. And it all starts this weekend with some great performances. As mentioned, tune in on Full Sports. Watch how great our indoor track and field teams do, and you will see for yourself that certainly is going to be a great season up ahead going into outdoor, as well as all these other teams with basketball and hockey starting to make their turn for the second half of the season, hopefully make it even better than the first. Well, that's the Ferris State Sports Report. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, March Madness, NBA, and NFL playoffs on deck. We'll make the picks and then break them down right here on the MBSP.
The MBSP is proud to partner with the people of Eagle Village Incorporated. With over 50 years of experience helping and changing the lives of youth, there are opportunities for you to be the next to make a direct impact, including plenty of positions available, including summer staff, internships, and more. For more information, visit eaglevillage.org. Eagle Village, where potential soars.
Second half of the show, here we go, starting off with college basketball, and it's certainly been a wild start to the season and a lot of upsets as usual, but definitely some interesting upsets as opposed to years past where there's a lot more that you can kind of predict. It's been a little bit of an unpredictable kind of start to college hoops, and certainly a lot of twists and turns, especially at the top of the table. There's a lot of changes in the number one overall ranked team. Right now sitting at the number one spot is the Houston Cougars, believe it or not, at 16-1 to start the season, followed by Kansas, Purdue, Alabama, Tennessee to round out the top five. Some notable teams right now in the top 25. There's not too many from around this area. Probably the only one that is probably the most eye-popping outside of Purdue as far as this local area is Wisconsin right now, sitting at 18 on the men's side. And certainly want to see some other teams in there like Michigan, Michigan State. Neither of them ranked as of now, as well as like teams like Indiana, Ohio State have certainly started to crumble just a little bit so far in the season, falling out of the top rankings as well. But when you look necessarily at how a lot of these teams have been playing, you look at a lot of these talented teams that have some really good coaching and a lot of great talent as far as just on the roster overall. Like Kansas is always one under Bill Self, with Jalen Wilson having a really solid season overall for the Jayhawks, as well as Kellen McCullough has provided a lot of spark for them, especially. And really, when you look at a lot of these other teams, a lot of great shooting teams, but just being able to do it on both dimensions. Houston has always been a dominant defensive program. They've really showed that so far this season that they can score offensively too and be in a lot of those games. Purdue has, Zach Edey, who's borderline already almost a lock for National Player of the Year for how well he's been playing right now for the Boilermakers, as well as Alabama, who I believe is rated right now better in basketball than they are football. I'm just kidding, but I just wanted an excuse to use that button. But they've played really well so far in this season. Let us know if you like the sound effects also, by the way. This is starting to work out some things where we have a lot more resources than we got to have. And you guys are certainly the proponent of that. So thank you all for making this show as great as it is. But Brandon Miller, Noah Clowney have been playing really well for the Crimson Tide, as well as Jaden Bradley, who's been running the show for them. They've definitely been a much needed, a little bit of a surprise team because you always knew they were really good, but a lot of people were just kind of, it was that perception of they're a basketball school. They're not necessarily as good of a basketball program. And going into last year, I believe they're the number, this last year or 2 years ago, in the NCAA tournament, they were the number 3 seed. They were the most voted off 3 seed in the overall first round and second round of a lot of brackets as far as being an upset. And they were certainly a team that were really good going into that year. Tennessee has been playing really well. What a year the Volunteers have had with their athletic programs overall. That's been really stellar to see, as well as a lot of these other illustrious basketball programs as Gonzaga, as well as UConn and Virginia, and all these other schools were starting to play better again. Duke is starting to pick it up just a little bit right now. They're at 24 in the standings, but they'll certainly start making their way back up. Baylor falling out of the top 25 was huge, but everybody knows that Baylor's a top 25 team. They had 93 received votes for the top 25, and they're the next team back in, assuming one of those other teams, like Charleston or Marquette or any of those teams, find a way to lose here later on this week. But certainly a lot of mix-up in the rankings so far, and especially when you look in the Big Ten right now, not necessarily the lineup that we were probably expecting when it comes to the standings is overall in the Big Ten. And when you look at it, it's already throughout the first month and a half, 2 months of the season, you could start to figure out that things were going to be a little bit different. When you look at it right now in the conference, Purdue leads the way, as well as Michigan State at 4-1. Both those teams playing very well right now. Wisconsin, as well as Northwestern. Rutgers at 4-2. They're sitting at 3 accidentally, masked over them the first time. But then you have Michigan, Penn State overall. Michigan 3-2, as well as Penn State 3-3. Iowa 3-3, who knocked off Michigan actually last night in overtime. In a big game there, as well as Maryland, Illinois, Ohio State. Haven't had the best luck overall in conference play, but still sitting in just about that. Could be in probably maybe not last team in, but definitely securing a 9 or a 10 seed as far as overall bracket projections go throughout this year. There could be 9 to 10 Big Ten teams that make it. It's certainly looking that way right now for how well a lot of these teams have been playing so far in the Big Ten, as well as the ACC's kind of gotten back on track for how well their basketball programs are going, despite the little bit of slip-ups here when you see from a lot of these other good programs like North Carolina especially. And we look at some other ones like Louisville that have been a little bit on the up and up as far as trying to get there, but not quite there yet. But a lot of good teams also from the SEC that have been picking up. Big 12's always been good. You see a lot of those teams there that have been playing really well. Kansas, Kansas State, Iowa State, Texas, TCU, Baylor will make it, I'm sure, later on. West Virginia's had a slow start in the Big 12, but they'll probably get it back on track. Oklahoma State is still in the Cade Cunningham loss effect. Probably, I'm not sure exactly, but you see some other great conferences that might be slept on a little bit. The Pac-12 might be one of them, which obviously 2 of those teams that have been playing really well will be future Big Ten teams with USC and UCLA. But then you also got Arizona. You got Arizona State that's been playing really well. Oregon is starting to kind of climb their way back up despite a really slow start. But you see a lot of these other great teams. I mean, really, the SEC looks like the team that really can make a lot of noise. And it looks like the conference that can do a lot of great things. You have a Kentucky team that's at 10-6 that a lot of teams have already said they don't want to play. And because they're that good, but they're 1-3 over on the SEC and 10-6. And you got all these other 12-win teams. You got Missouri, you got Auburn, you got Tennessee and Alabama, top 5 teams. Arkansas right now at 12-4, 1-3 for really how well their program's been put together. You can see a lot of the success going there. Especially you see a lot of these other programs that have been really climbing their way up, and now they're establishing themselves in for these tournaments year after year. And when you look at Arkansas, their only losses so far have been against a number 4 Alabama team on the road, against Auburn, and then against a really tough LSU team that's also, I believe, at double-digit wins on the season so far. So you have a really deep SEC conference as well that can make a lot of noise. And when you look as far as March Madness predictions and bracket predictions already, kind of where we're at throughout pretty much through the halfway point of January, you definitely see a lot of these potential teams that can make some noise, especially from the top spots. It kind of looks a little bit more top-heavy than you would see necessarily on normal years where it might be a little bit more spread out. But this was the bracket predictions as of a month ago from Andy Katz. We'll go over the most recent ones in comparison here in just a minute. But the number 1 seeds, Houston, Virginia, Purdue, and UConn. Virginia and UConn are not in the top 5, so they're already out of the 1 seed consideration so far comparison to this bracket. Maryland, the Terrapins were in a number 2 seeded spot, as well as Texas, Kansas, and Tennessee. All 3 of those teams kind of around the same mark, but Maryland has went all the way down. And Indiana was a 3 seed at one point. They're not even in the top 25 anymore, as well as these other teams like Alabama and Duke that have kind of been playing right now. Opposite as of recently. Duke started out a little more hot. Now they're kind of cooling off. Alabama's been doing the opposite. They're red hot right now in the top 20 or top 5, I should say, in the top 25. Then you have Baylor, who is a 4 seed. They've fallen all the way out. Creighton has been slipping up. They were a 6 seed at one point. But you have a lot of these other teams that have been kind of slipping a little bit. But as far as when you look at a lot of the latest top 25s, you can kind of make that comparison. But when you look necessarily at the most recent one, got to take a look at Andy Katz's bracket predictions of 2023 as of late. He's now kind of put it down. Now he's got Houston, Alabama, Kansas, Purdue, which if you necessarily have which I saw this the other day, Baylor potentially playing Purdue in a 1-8 matchup, potentially in the NCAA tournament. Wow. Baylor is the most underrated 8 team I've ever been. And I might be biased because I picked them one year and they got me a win in my bracket pool. But I still love the way that Scott Drew handles that program and how they play. But you have all these other teams that have been playing very good basketball and that can play spoiler, but it can also lose to an unranked team over in the next couple of weeks, like Indiana. You got Illinois in a lot of these games in the Big Ten. You got all these other really good teams that can necessarily make their way back up. North Carolina could end up being a 5, a 4, even a 3 seed by the end of the year, despite their slow start. You got Kentucky potentially going to have to play in as a 10 or 11 seed, and that's going to make this tournament really interesting. But when I necessarily look around at a lot of these teams, the ones that can obviously make some noise, not necessarily the top dogs like Purdue or Kansas or Houston or some of those teams, but some of the other really good teams that I think can make some noise are the Razorbacks. I think really the way that Arkansas has played the last couple of years, they can show you that they can win the games offensively and defensively. They're a multi-dimensional basketball team. Maybe not necessarily as they were in years past, but they're still 12-4 on the season. And Eric Musselman's done a really good job with that program for how they've put it together. And really the spread of wealth has been they have 5 guys that can score the basketball on the floor at all the time. And they have guys that can create steals, create blocks, create turnovers, 5 guys at a time, all on the floor. There's no dominant players with those teams. So those definitely can be one of the teams that I could watch. Another team, as much as I hate to say it, Michigan State could be a team that can make some noise this year. You see how well Tyson Walker has been playing. You see now that they have Malik Hall back, he brings a whole nother dimension to that Spartan team. And just overall, the experience of Tom Izzo can really bring you some big time advantages in March. And as much as it's crazy to say that, yes, did they lose to Middle Tennessee State one year? Yeah. So what? They're still a really good basketball team. But you still have a lot of those great players that can get you into the tournament. You see all of these Cinderella stories of these players. Max Promise from Oral Roberts last year. He willingly got Oral Roberts into the Sweet 16 last year. He was really kind of putting the team on his shoulders, not necessarily saying his teammates didn't contribute or anything, but he was the prime reason why that team got into the tournament last year. So you have a lot of these teams that can figure it out with their individual talent. And I think Michigan State could be that team to do that. Whether it's Malik Hall, whether it's Tyson Walker, whether it's Joey Hauser, those guys can ball and they can show you that they can play. And necessarily, in retrospect, I know a lot of people are probably wondering me and Joe's thoughts about this. Michigan, I think, is still a tournament team. I know they still haven't been playing their best, and Juwan Howard is still trying to figure out the best method of process for making this a championship caliber team. They've lost a couple really bad games down the stretch, but I think necessarily that if he looks in the mirror, gets himself right with his game plan and how he wants to get this team back together, and the guys start playing better basketball, I think they'll find their way in the tournament, especially if they have a really good Big Ten tournament and finish out the rest of the second half of the conference slate. But I think we'll go with one more team here from this Baylor, or from this bubble list. No, it is not Baylor. I just read Baylor's bio on my screen, and obviously super excited to see if they'll climb back up, considering how well they've played. But another team that I can see that could necessarily make a really good run this year, that may not be a top 2 or a top 3 seed, for example, I think could be Virginia. I really do think so. I think Virginia, for what they have done in the tournament, I think always gets written off. I think they're a team that really isn't necessarily the most talented team on paper. Yeah, we get it. I mean, Coach Bennett is phenomenal in what he's done with that program to really bring how well they've been able to bounce back in a lot of these years past, especially in some really tough games. But for really how well you saw, especially in that North Carolina game, this team wins gritty games. 65-58, the final score was in that game against the Tar Heels. That is a gritty win. And when you see how well this team, especially losing to UMBC, we all know the 16-1 upset that's going to be remembered in the rest of history and record books for the rest of time. But the next year they won the national tournament. They threw that all away and made it all the way the rest next year. I think they could be a team that makes some noise right now. They're sitting at a 4 or a 5 seed and varying of bracket predictions and all this other stuff. But when you got guys that can fill it up, Ben Vanderplas had a really good night against North Carolina. He could be a really good player for them. I think you have a lot of talent on these teams, and well as Reese Beekman could be a guy that can bring you a lot of great minutes for them up top. So I think he's a really good ball distributor. I think he can make that offense work. But as far as the defensive prowess that Virginia can show, I think that really makes them a tough team to beat. And I know we say that every year, but this team definitely, they're showing that they don't have to play their best to win these games. They only shot 57% from the line, and they could have definitely ended that game against North Carolina a lot sooner if they would have made more of their free throws. But I think when you look at it, they don't turn the ball over and they turn opponents over. That's going to get you these possessions. You get that talent really solidified within the system, and you can get that efficiency offensively, moving the basketball, slowing the game down, which Virginia loves to do. Then that really puts the ball in your court, especially against a lot of these good teams. And I think they could be a team that can make some noise. Obviously, we'll cover this as more. We'll get Joe's picks as well coming up next week to see what he has in mind. We'll obviously cover March Madness the more we go here going through the rest of January into late February before we get into the madness that is known as March. Anyway, moving over now, we go over into the NBA. We haven't talked about that in a while. Figured bring it up on the show here on this Friday. Just a little bit of an update as far as where a lot of these teams are at for those NBA fanatics out there. Certainly has been Boston's world right now in the Eastern Conference, but not necessarily as dominant as elite as it may seem. They are up 3 games on Brooklyn right now, but the Nets have really turned themselves around so far. Obviously, the loss of Kevin Durant could make it very interesting to see how this team really bounces back. They're going to be able to really get themselves back on track. If Kyrie can have a really good outing, as well as really just kind of get a lot of those players that a lot of those dynamic scorers, the opportunity to fill it a little bit, because they're a really good talented team across the board. You got a lot of great players on that squad that can score it. I mean, you just look at Seth Curry, who we know can shoot the basketball very well. You got a lot of young players that haven't played necessarily as many minutes, but that can still really bring a big impact, like Cam Thomas, Kessler Edwards. But you have still a really good opportunity. You got Ben Simmons, of course. You got Nick Claxton, who's been playing a lot better as of recently. You have Markieff Morris, who's a really good role player for that team. So I think Brooklyn can still be a team. They might slip up in the standings. They might become third or fourth by the time, or fifth even by KD when he comes back, for how tight this conference has been. But when KD comes back, he could be an MVP candidate for right now, how well he's playing. He's averaging better numbers than he did pre-Achilles tear. I think that just shows you how well this guy is at basketball. He's played phenomenal and deserves more respect around the league. But Giannis and the Bucks sitting at 3 right now, 27-15 overall, just a half game behind the Nets, as well as the Cleveland Cavaliers. How about the Cavs? Donovan Mitchell, that crew, have played phenomenal basketball this year. Kevin Love is still contributing at a great level for them. Jared Allen's been great. Darius Garland has been great in the backcourt. Karis LeVert as well. For when he's on the floor, really contributes very well for this team. They have put together the right system, and I think that really can show that they can be a really good team this year. Are they necessarily an NBA Finals candidate? Maybe not yet, but potentially down the road, they can potentially be that team. 76ers sitting at 5th, as well as the Knicks at 6 right now. Pacers followed by the Heat. Right now, all those top 8 teams above 500, where that cusp gets cut for the 9 through 15 seeds. And right now, the Pistons are not last, ladies and gentlemen. We are ahead of the Hornets, 12-33 total. Our winning percentage as of now, the Hornets sitting at 11-32. And I think when you look at the Pistons, especially for those that are interested, because obviously we're a Michigan-based show and a Ferris State specific, the most of the team that people root for around here is Detroit. Then I think there needs to be a change that occurs. I'm not exactly sure what that change is. We talked to a couple of buddies about this, and I think that there just needs to be a change of some sort. The loss of Cade hurt. We know that, obviously. But this team is still better than they're playing on the floor. And I think that there needs to be something schematically that changes a little bit. Right now, Bojan Bogdanovic has played phenomenal basketball, and there's a reason he's going to be on the trade rumor mark all the way up until the trade deadline and potentially gets dealt. I think fans need to actually prepare for Bojan getting dealt, because for what he's doing with this team right now is phenomenal, but we needed him back with Cade. We needed him back with a full roster that was healthy, and we needed him to not necessarily have that big of a load as he's putting on right now, because obviously that depletes his level just a little bit, and that would help us to keep us more around. But for really having Cade go down, he's been the primary scorer in a lot of these games, and he's showing out now. A lot of teams are interested. That could lead him to getting a really juicy offer on the other side that Troy Weaver's going to have to take. I think we have to prepare for that. But Jalen Duren, I think, is a stud, and I think he will definitely find his way to play more minutes here and here out. Him playing with Isaiah Stewart is a very interesting idea that I think needs a little bit more time for experimentation, especially considering that Stu can shoot it a little bit. He showed it. I hate the fact that he shoots potentially 7 threes a game as a big, but in this game of basketball, I kind of got to get over it. But I think Jalen Duren brings you a lot of potential. He's a really raw, fantastic player that really, I think Penny did a great job with at Memphis, that I think is really NBA ready for how well he's been playing. And I think he's going to get even better as the season goes on. Alec Burks finally getting him back. He's still trying to figure out his rhythm after being injured throughout the majority of that first part of the season. And you got obviously Sadiq Bey, who's been up and down shooting wise. Jaden Ivey's kind of going through some of the rookie slumps, but he could still be a really good contributor to us. And you got to give it time for these guys to develop. We can see, I think that's just the issue now that I actually say that out loud. Giving it time to have these guys necessarily develop is great, but as long as it's being done the right way. And that's almost what I'm considering, is this team being kind of built. I think it's being built the right way, but isn't necessarily the best way. I think now that I'm actually thinking out loud here, and this is completely off my train of thought here on the show as opposed to some of my notes, I think you have to see now, is there a way that we can choreograph this team that can be in a different scheme that can make a lot of these developmental players necessarily, I would say, less pressured? And because I think the biggest thing for Jaden Ivey, I think Jaden Ivey has done some good things so far this year. I think he's still going to get better. I think he feels the pressure of being that number 4 overall pick I think he feels the pressure of now having to take Cade's spot. And I think he's done a good job with that in some games, but you can definitely tell when he plays sometimes, and especially early in the season, maybe not necessarily as of late, but there's still been some times you see it where he might be going a little bit too hard and trying to make too much stuff happen. Is that what you want a rookie to develop as? Or do you want him to kind of get just very comfortable in limited amount of time and then just increase that time? That's what I'm almost wondering. And that's why the number one thing that I'm wondering is, do we need a coaching change? I think Dwayne Casey's a great coach. I think he's a great players coach. I think he's got great relationships with a lot of the guys in the locker room. But is it necessarily time to maybe bring in a new face and kind of change some things up that could spark this rebuild a little bit? Because we have a lot of good talent on this team, but when you see now with a lot of these other teams that have really taken off, AKA like Indiana has been a really good team with a lot of their young talent there with Tyrese Halliburton and that crew, they've played really good. But now you have the Pacers, for example. The Knicks have started to buy their way into some with some young to kind of buy in some veterans to support the younger guys, kind of similar to we do. They're 6, we're 14. I don't think Jalen Brunson is the difference of 8 spots in the standings. But then you have some of these other teams that you can just tell that are kind of on their way down and don't have necessarily the young talent, but they're still winning more games. The Wizards, for example, even the Hawks with minus Trae Young, they still have a lot of young players there. Onyeka Okongwu, the guy that played with the Ball brothers and Chino Hills, he's been playing not necessarily up to his standards as much as you would like to have saw when you necessarily saw he was drafted. But you have a lot of these young teams that are still finding a way to win games. Is that because of the system as much as is the talent? And that's what I'm wondering. I think our talent's through the roof, but do we need to fix our scheme a little bit? That's what I think we need to do. And if that necessarily doesn't work, or if they never change the scheme, then maybe it's time to make a coaching change up top. I think that there's a lot of people that support Dwayne Casey. I was a guy that definitely thought Dwayne Casey was a great hire. But I think right now where we're at, I think you can only make excuses for one more year is what I'm saying. I think throughout the rest of this year, I think next year, if we have a great pick, and especially if we get Victor Wembanyama, and we can play with them, Jaden Ivey, Cade, Killian playing better, Sadiq, Jalen, Isaiah, both Isaiahs, I should say, and you still end up 16-33 by the end of halfway through that season, I think it might be time. I think you have to make that consideration for how much talent that team has, that there is something within the scheme, within the coaching, within something that needs to change quick, fast, and in a hurry, because we can't go through this reload for many years upon the time. Look where the Red Wings are at. They're over 500. Stevie Y's got them on the right track. Lions, Dan Campbell, Brad Holmes, already a 2-year turnaround. It's taken the Pistons 3 years. Are we going to keep waiting, or are we going to go? Something has to occur for this team to start getting wins. And I think people are starting to get a little impatient on this Pistons team, as much as I am, for them to start winning basketball games. So whatever that is, I know there's an excuse that Cade's out this year. I know he's a major part of what the scheme is behind. But, wait a minute. Okay. So we need now to try to get Jaden Ivey in that spot. Is that what you're saying? I don't think that's necessarily the answer that probably Dwayne Casey's thinking. And I think we need to find a way to get, maybe it even is to have Killian play a little bit more of the point. Maybe you bring in Kojo for a couple more minutes a game, which I'm not thrilled about but I think he's a really good glue guy. He's not as much of a dynamic player as a lot of people say talent-wise, but I think he's still a really good, solid player. But I think there needs to be a change schematically. I think that's what the Pistons need moving forward here for the rest of the NBA season. Anyway, quickly going over through the Western Conference, through those that are interested. Definitely, no doubt, the Nuggets have been a really good team so far. The Grizz both tied at the top as well. Got to see John Morant in person when I took my trip down to Motown. Yeah, that guy's a legit basketball player. He's going to be an absolute superstar in this league for years to come. Pelicans, followed by the Mavs with Luka. Kings, Clippers, Suns, Warriors round out the 5 through 8 slots. And a lot of familiar names that have slipped down quite a bit. Lakers, 13 right now. Trailblazers, 11. With Dame, as well as the Jazz sitting at 9. The T-Wolves, a playoff T-Wolves team last year, they're sitting at 10 right now, 20 and 22, just about 10 games out from the top spot. I think you start to see a little bit of urgency within Los Angeles. I'll say it right now. I think you might necessarily see a couple changes going to be occurring, potentially. Maybe it even is getting close to time when we see LeBron go to another franchise. I'll just throw that out right now as a crazy idea. Could you imagine if he made that move? And with a lot of these teams where they're at so far with personnel, boy, going to be a crazy offseason. But Anyway, finishing out the show here. Thanks for all tuning in. Make sure you subscribe and follow if you love this show. And if you love this episode, you're going to love it when you get back with me and Joe, and especially with a lot of the great things coming up. Certainly a lot of great things on deck coming up with this show. And we thank you guys for all of that, including potential live streams coming up soon. We're still figuring out those things, as well as new guests coming on the show. Got some great ones already slated for you. And I'm going to tell you what, you're going to love some of these interviews we have planned with some of these personnel. But anyway, finishing out, NFL playoffs begins. Wild card round. It's going to be a really fun weekend of football starting on Saturday at 4:30. 49ers hosting the Seahawks. As far as the predictions are, I'll make some game predictions as well, just to see necessarily where we're at as far as just keeping that train going. I know maybe we'll submit Joe's picks and we'll compare, and I'll make sure I'll verify them here before the games kick off. But 49ers at the Seahawks. I'm going to root against the Seahawks as much as I can because they screw the Lions. But no, I'm just kidding. I think the Seahawks are a good team. I do think they'll still lose regardless. So I think the Niners are a Super Bowl contender. I think they're that good, even with Brock Purdy. That defense, DeMeco Ryans is one of the most underrated coordinators in the league and should be the most recognized coordinators in the league, and is certainly going to be in the head coaching interview process for a lot of these teams coming up soon. But I think the 49ers will win this game. I think defensively, I think they're going to slow down the Seahawks offense, which has really kind of kept them in a lot of these games. The defense has been playing well, but I don't think the Seahawks have the capability. I know they have some really good corners, obviously, with Bryan as well as Woolen. But I think you look at where that team is at defensively. I don't think they have the arsenal of players to lock down a lot of these good players like Deebo, Brandon Ayuk, Christian McCaffrey, George Kittle. I think that's just too much to handle for them offensively. So what are they going to do offensively to counteract? Kenneth Walker should be the rookie of the year. Are they going to be pounding the ground a lot, or are they going to try to do it through the air with DK, Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, and Geno Smith? I think that's the route that they're going to try to go. But that 49ers secondary will make plays when that defensive line gets pressure. I don't think it's a question of, well, I guess that is what's going to be the determining factor. I don't know if the Seahawks offensive line is going to be able to hold that 49er pass rush. I don't know if it's going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen. But if they do, they have a chance. But if they don't, like I think is going to happen, I think the 49ers are going to get after Geno Smith. They're going to get him flustered. I think the Niners will win this game. I'll mark down a final score here of 31-23. Niners going to win at home, and they advance next week for round 2 of the postseason. Next game on Saturday, 8:15 on NBC and Peacock. Chargers at the Jaguars. Can you believe that the Jaguars have made it this far, man? I feel happy for them. They feel like the Lions of the AFC. So I'm kind of rooting for them a little bit. And I think this is a game, arguably, that if the Chargers lose, that could be the end of Brandon Staley. I think it could be. Just the way that this season has gone, it's been a little underwhelming. They've battled some injuries, I know. But I think just the overall offensive play hasn't been very good enough for how well this offense should be. They're number 8th overall, I believe, statistically. I mean, their passing attack is great, but I think their defense has been a little underwhelming as well. And I think the rushing attack for the Chargers has been pretty abysmal. I think right now the Jaguars could be a team I think that could win this game. I don't know if I'm just going to pick them as of yet. I'm going to talk out my thoughts here just for a second here to see if that drives a true opinion of mine, because I think it's going to be a close game. I think it's going to be a close game regardless, but I think with Trevor Lawrence, I know I read a stat the other day that said he has not lost a Saturday game, college, high school, or pro, I believe, as of yet. Is this the first one? I don't know. This is also at TIAA Bank Field in Jacksonville, even though the Chargers have a better record and I think are ahead of them as far as in the power rankings, but it's still a road game. And I think the Jaguars could be a team that upsets the Chargers, but I think I'm going to pick the Chargers because I think Brandon Staley's coaching for his job. And I think the Jaguars have been playing really well, but I think the Chargers offense isn't. I think this is the game that the Chargers defense has to step up. I think the offense won't have any problems getting up 20 points, but I think this is a game the defense steps up. And I think they force a lot of turnovers against the Jacksonville Jaguars offense. I think Doug Peterson might have a little bit of trouble. And this is a game that Brandon Staley needs to win. I think it has to be. I'm going to take the Chargers in a close one. I think this final will be 34-28. Chargers beat the Jaguars to move on in the second round. Next game, this one's great. Dolphins at the Bills starting on Sunday, 1 o'clock on CBS. I think the Bills will win this game. I think that they need to win this game. I think the whole world's going to be rooting for them to win this game. I think the whole DeMar Hamlin situation, is going to spark a lot of fan base for this Bills team, as it should. I think that so much support for the Bills has been absolutely fantastic. I know for me personally, just seeing all that has been really just eye-opening to me. But outside of that, the Bills overall have been the more consistent team. They've been the team that certainly has more health going into this game. The Dolphins are probably going to be playing with Skylar Thompson at quarterback. I think that's a big red flag for the Dolphins. I think you still have the ability to get Tyreek Hill. You still have a lot of these really good players that you can get with the Jeff Wilsons, the Raheem Mosterts, that you can get them touches, Mike Gesicki as well. But I think you have to have the ability to use the deep ball as well. Getting Jalen Waddle in that mix as well. Almost forgot his name. If they can't get the ball moving downfield, Bills are going to just keep bringing pressure. They're going to keep pushing you off the line of scrimmage backwards and backwards. And you're going to have to start either running the ball or you're going to have to start throwing in these jet sweeps, all of these sort of things, which they haven't done a whole lot of this year. So I think that's going to bring them problems. I think the Bills, with their ability to run the ball, both in the backfield and from the quarterback scramble spot with Josh Allen, I think they're going to have no problems getting away from that Dolphins secondary. I think the Bills will win this game, but I think it'll be a little less low, or I think it'll be more low scoring, less high scoring than I think a lot of people think. I think it's going to be like 24-17 the final. The Bills beat the Dolphins. Next game on deck here. We'll wrap these things up a little bit quicker here so we can get you guys out of here to a great weekend. Giants against the Vikings. I think this is an upset game. I think this could be a game the Vikings lose, but I think I'm going to have to trust the Vikings as of now. I'm not totally sure if this is a game I want to pick the upset for, because I think it's one of those situations where it's like, this game should be an upset. It's going to be the one everyone picks as an upset, the Giants beating the Vikings. But it's almost like it's too good. It makes too much sense on paper. I think that this could be a game that the Vikings win. But I think next week they'll have problems with whichever team they play, whether it's the Buccaneers, as far as in the trenches, I think would throw them off. I think the Cowboys have the ability to really move the ball as long as their offense is fine. But I'll get to that here in just a minute. I think that this could be a game I think that the Vikings will squeak out of. I think the Giants are going to throw a lot of wrenches at them. I think Brian Daboll is making himself a coach of the year kind of game. I think this is one of those kind of games where if you can beat Kevin O'Connell, I think that can be a potential situation that he could win himself the award by winning this game. I think that would be, if he can slow down that Vikings offense just enough here and get out with a win, I think that just shows you how great this Giants defense can be. And I think right now, when you look at the Vikings, you got to move the ball on the ground with Dalvin Cook, or play action doesn't work. That's big issue 1A. They're going to be heavily shading Justin Jefferson. So this is going to have to be an Adam Thielen, KJ Osborne, TJ Hawkinson type of attack if you're going to want to move the ball on the Giants, which they're going to try to pressure you. Wing Martindale's going to blitz you. You know he's going to blitz you. So how are you going to react to that? You're going to get the play action game going. You're going to get the screens out to Dalvin Cook. You're going to spread it out over the short, screen pass on the outside. How are they going to do that? Because the Giants are going to throw a lot of pressure at them. The Vikings aren't going to have as much time to work with as they normally do. How do they respond to that? I think they just do enough to get the job done. I think the Vikings win 27-24 over the Giants and move on to the next week. Next game, Bengals at the Ravens. This one at Cincinnati at Paul Brown. I believe that's actually where they played the last game of the regular season. So right back to where they started from last week at 8:15 on NBC. I'll keep this one quick. Lamar Jackson doesn't play, the Ravens don't win. It's hard for me to get on track with the Ravens. I think Anthony Brown has been put in a spot that's really tough because this is a playoff caliber team. This is a playoff bound team, obviously. But I think this is just a team that's just not quite. It needs that spark offensively. And it starts with the quarterback. Lamar Jackson makes this offense that much more lethal, and they need to pay him if they want to keep him. That's the fact here. This is more than just an injury to Lamar Jackson. This is going to be an offseason where he finds out the commitment of Baltimore, the city of Baltimore, the Ravens organization, and the players especially. I think that's going to be what happens with this game. Because if you win this game without Lamar and you can make a playoff run without Lamar, are they going to keep Lamar? I don't know. That's what's going to have to be. But I don't think that with the Bengals defense playing as underrated as they've played, Joe Burrow and that offense would have no problem, I think, against the Ravens. Ravens will bring pressure. They're going to be good in coverage, but I think you're still going to have enough big plays from T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. I think Joe Mixon's going to make a move on the ground, and he's going to keep the Ravens guessing as far as rushing attack. I think the Bengals still win this game. I think they're going to win this game. Final 28-20 over the Ravens, I think. I don't think I picked that score. No, 28-20 over the Ravens. I think they'll move on. They'll win 2 in a row. And the Bengals will move on next week. Final game, Monday Night Football, Cowboys at Buccaneers. Here's my upset. Bucs beat the Cowboys, and here's why. Dak and that offense have been stagnant as a snail as of late. It was really bad against Washington. Washington had nothing to play for but just a pride. And they trounced the Cowboys. Now the Cowboys got to go on the road to Raymond James. It doesn't matter how bad the Buccaneers played last week against Atlanta, even though that kind of contradicts what I just said. But here's why that's a difference. Cowboys were playing for a number 1 seed, right? They could have gotten in with obviously the Eagles won, it wouldn't have mattered, but they had to give themselves a chance. But the Bucs didn't have to play for anything. They already had their seed locked up. They knew they were going to be the 4 seed. They knew they had already clinched it. They didn't have anything else to play for. So they worked on different things with Tom and other personnel. This is the number 2 passing offense. The defense for the Cowboys hasn't been great recently. They're only ranked 13 statistically, but if you ask, they're worse than 13 as far as any analyst is concerned. I think the Buccaneers win this game. I think this needs to be a bounce back game for guys like Leonard Fournette. I think this has to be a game where you get those running backs, you get them moving the trenches a little bit. And you look back at week 1, this was a game where they played at AT&T and the Bucs beat them 19-3. 19-3. And now I think the Buccaneers aren't necessarily as much of a better team, but I think Dallas could be a potential worse team than where they were in week 1. I think this is a game that you have to imagine that Tom Brady has to win to really keep his playoff hopes alive this final season. But Dak Prescott's got to play a whole lot better if he wants to give his team a chance, which coming off of last week playing on the road, I think the Buccaneers are going to bring pressure. I think they're going to really establish themselves in the trenches, prevent Zeke to run the ball. This can have to be a Tony Pollard type of game or a CeeDee Lamb type of game where they need to get those guys out in space and let them work, especially on those short concepts, getting them slants, Ohio concepts out to the outside, getting them picks up 4 or 5 yards at a time just to get momentum going. Because I don't think they're going to get it on the ground. Because, I mean, you saw that offense, 27 attempts, 64 rushing yards. That's 2.4 yards per carry for the Cowboys they had in that week against Washington. So they're going to have to figure it out. Or if not, Bucs are going to send them home, and I think they will. 17-14 final score. The Cowboys end their season with a pretty much another disappointing game. I think Dak could throw 2 interceptions in this game, especially for how many interceptions he's already thrown with bad decisions. I think Tom Brady will take his team to victory, and we'll march on in the NFL playoffs. Let me know your picks, and we'll certainly see how they turn out next week. Thank you for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe, follow on our YouTube as well as Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you find this podcast as well. It's all the future platforms coming soon. I'll be sure to keep you in the deets as we continue to figure those out. Big thanks to everybody that made the show possible. Bulldog Radio, Anchor, as well as all the ISI folks here that helped us use the studio, as well as the MEBA organization for kind of organizing this whole collaboration as well with Bulldog Radio. We thank all those that made this possible because we certainly are creating better podcasts, and it's all because of you guys and your support for helping us build this show. But I'm Brandon Wirtz signing off. We'll see all you next week with Joe alongside me. Until then, take care, everybody.